When it comes to adapting comic book characters into live action, it's a little tough because some of the designs from the comics can feel a little bit goofy. And back in the early days of superhero serials, you can definitely tell the costumes were made of cheap material and just didn't do the characters justice. But these types of costumes have evolved throughout the years, and in this video I'm going to be sharing my picks for the best costumes slash designs of DC characters. But let me know in the comment section down below what you think the best look is for each of the DC characters in terms of live action. And without any further ado, let's hop right into it. So starting off with Superman, he's had a decent amount of actors play him throughout the years, and they've all had different costumes. It's a little tough to evaluate which costume is the best because in general the color scheme hasn't really changed over the years, but some small details have, like his S logo and the material the costume's made out of, as well as if he's wearing his underwear outside of his pants or not. Now the Superman suits from the 40s and 50s, we can rule those out because they were made from some cheap material. A lot of people definitely would say that the Christopher Reeve suit is the best, and while it is one of the better ones, I personally don't think it's the best just because the material it was made out of was cheaper than the stuff they do now. Now I would say there are some pretty good ones like Henry Cavill's suit in Man of Steel and I guess Batman v Superman, as well as the newest one in his upcoming movie. But I would probably say the best live action Superman suit is his suit from Superman and Lois. It feels true to the comics while also being made out of good material. Not as scale-like as Henry Cavill's, but it still has a little bit of that kind of texture, and it just looks really clean. Now, when it comes to Jor-El, he's had some different suits over the years, but I would say my favorite costume for him is the one from Smallville. It's very similar to the white one Marlon Brando wore, except this one isn't like glow-in-the-dark and all weird like that. Now, as for Supergirl, she's had her own movie. She also appeared in the DC Extended Universe film The Flash. I would say her best suit is actually from the CW series. Now, Shazam is a character that's had a few costumes over the years. He did appear in a 1940s serial, and he also was in like a show in the 1970s. Now we can rule those costumes out because they were made of cheap material, so that narrows it down between the two Shazam movies. And there's a little bit of a difference between those costumes because in the first movie his like lightning bolt actually like glows and has electricity coming from it. So in all honesty, I actually prefer the design from the second Shazam film where it's more metallic. I just think it looks a little bit more clean, and his cape is a little different. It might not be as comic accurate, but I actually do prefer that design of the cape as well. Now as for Batman, he did appear in a couple of 1940s serials, which of course we can rule those out. Of course the Adam West suit is great for what it was going for, but probably not the best Batman suit in general. Then of course you have the more like rubbery suits like they have in the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher films, and even the Christopher Nolan films I guess are kind of a little bit more rubbery, but they do have more of a militaristic look. Personally, out of all those rubbery suits, I prefer Michael Keaton's suits the best, but of course Robert Pattinson, the newest Batman actor, has a really good suit as well that feels like something someone would piece together out of different materials. But I would actually say the best Batman suit is probably the main DCEU Batman suit that Ben Affleck wears. He wore it in Batman v Superman, and I guess in Zack Snyder's Justice League it was like a little bit darker, but that's really not a big difference. But that suit just feels very comic accurate. It feels like the Dark Knight Returns comic. It's actually very clean. It outlines Batman's muscles very well. It's just a little bit of padding.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
So they just really made the character from the comics come to life in this suit. Now as for Batgirl, she's had a few different suits over the years in the 1960s show and Batman and Robin. I would say her best suit is actually from the canceled movie, which of course we have photos of that so we know what it looks like. And it's actually very similar to the 1960s suit, but just more modern. Now the Flash is obviously one of the most iconic DC characters, and he has some good suits, like his first one from the DCU is very underrated. His one in the Flash movie is a little bit scuffed, even though the idea of the design is very good. Of course his newest suit in the CW series was good because it had the golden boot, but I would say his best suit is probably from season 4 of the CW series. It just looks very clean and comic accurate. Now as for Cyborg, he has appeared in like a couple TV shows, but those weren't really that good. So I think easily the best design for him is from the Justice League movie. Now in the theatrical cut of the Justice League movie, he actually modifies it a little bit at the end. The red thing becomes like a circle. And to be completely honest, like on a story level, it's just really dumb because there's no explanation as to why he does that. And I mean, Justice League 2017 is a dumb movie, but with that dumb story aside, I do do think it looks a little bit better with the circle because it just looks a little bit more comic accurate. So I would say that is the official best Cyborg design. Now as for Wonder Woman, her history on screen does go a while back, but I would say her main suit from the DCEU is pretty much perfection. It just has that classic Wonder Woman design, but it's not made out of cheap material or anything like that. Now as for Aquaman, he did appear in like the Smallville series, and that suit definitely really wasn't that good, but he has had a few suits in the DCEU. But if we're being completely honest, I think easily his best suit is like his orange and gold and green one that he gets in the Aquaman movie. It's the one that's on all the posters. That is his most iconic look from the comics. As for Martian Manhunter, he actually did appear in like the Justice League TV movie many years ago, which I guess was okay for the time. He also appeared on CW, which was actually a really good design, but I think I'm actually going to pick his design from Zack Snyder's Justice League over that. I just think it looks very clean. Now as for Robin, he's had a pretty goofy costume in the comics. It's a little hard to adapt into live action. He did appear in the 1940s Batman serials, as well as the 1960s Batman series, but the first time the suit was kind of modernized was in the 90s Joel Schumacher Batman films. I think his Batman Forever suit though is a little bit too overcomplicated though, and I don't like the nipples on it. Now I will say his Batman and Robin suit is actually pretty underrated. Like aside from the nipples, it's a good design, but I would say Robin's best design is from the Titans show. I guess the Jason Todd version is what I'm referring to, because that is the one based off of the classic Robin design. I guess Nightwing also appears in that show, but I don't know if he has any other live action appearances, so there's nothing else to compare it to. But overall, the Jason Todd Titans suit is probably the best modernization of the Robin suit. It looks very good. As for Green Arrow, he had a couple different live action appearances. He was in Smallville, but I would definitely go with his CW version as the best costume. It really doesn't make a difference to me whether or not his sleeves are up or down. Of course, you also have villains like the Joker, and he's definitely a character that's more than just his suit. He also has to have the makeup and that kind of stuff. The Cesar Romero version from the 1960s was actually very good for the time, aside from his mustache that he didn't shave. As for some of the more modern ones though, I'm not the biggest fan of how Jared Leto's Joker looks. And the newest version of the character that has his own movies, I'm not really the biggest fan of that either, but just because the makeup is more like clownish and not distinctly the Joker, and I'm not the biggest fan of the red suit either. So that narrows it down between Heath Ledger and Jack Nicholson, and it's really tough because both of them have a very comic accurate suit. I think Jack Nicholson's is a little bit more traditional, where it is the classic tie though. But then it comes down to the design of their face. Heath Ledger's was more like realistic while still being comic accurate, and it does look very good. But I think I'm going to go with the Jack Nicholson version just because of his smile. Of course, Lex Luthor is also a very iconic DC villain, and while many actors have actually played him throughout the years, we still haven't seen him wearing like the green suit. But of course, we've seen him in business and that kind of stuff, and I think the Kevin Spacey version of the character looks the best because this version is actually bald throughout the movie he's in, and I just like the suits and ties that he wears. It just looks the most like Lex Luthor from the comics. Of course, there's Steppenwolf, and he's had a couple different designs. He looked different in the Justice League movie than he did in the director's cut, and I would definitely say I'm going to go with the Snyder cut version. It just looks cleaner in my opinion. As for General Zod, it's pretty much either the 1980s Superman 2 version or the Man of Steel version, and that's really not much of a competition because the Superman 2 Zod costume was very dated, and the Man of Steel Zod costume just looks much better, so I'm going with that one. Of course, you have the Penguin, an iconic Batman villain. The most comic accurate look, especially for the comics of the time, was probably Burgess Meredith in the 1960s. Of course, you also have Danny DeVito, which was a more uncivilized version of the character, and Penguin also appeared in Gotham, but I think my favorite Penguin outfit is actually probably Colin Farrell's like main black and purple kind of suit, because it feels very realistic. Obviously, he's a crime boss, and the costume he wears is kind of right in line with that. As for the Riddler, he's had some interesting costumes throughout the years. Obviously in the 1960s in the Jim Carrey version. In the newest movie, his design was more like a real-world serial killer. But I think my favorite is probably just the Gotham suit. I think that's a good way to adapt his comic look into live action. As for Two-Face, really the only options are the Tommy Lee Jones version in 1995, or the Dark Knight version, and I feel like the Tommy Lee Jones version was a little bit too over the top, where half of his face is like bright pink, and it's like a straight line down his face as well. That's not very realistic, so I think it easily has to be the Dark Knight, although I will say I'm not a huge fan of how Harvey Dent has blonde hair in this movie, because I don't think that contrasts very well, but it's still easily the better design of the character. And then of course you have Bane, who appeared in Batman and Robin, as well as the Dark Knight Rises and Gotham, I guess. I actually do feel like the Batman and Robin design was relatively comic accurate, but at the same time the costume still felt pretty over the top. And like the material his mask was made out of feels very cheap, so I'm actually going to go with the Tom Hardy version, but I'm still kind of hoping in the future that they'll have a more comic accurate design. As for Catwoman, she's had some good costumes over the years. I'm probably going to go with the Michelle Pfeiffer Batman Returns suit. I just think that's probably the most comic accurate. And then as for Mr. Freeze, he had 3 different actors play him in the 1960s. And of course you have the Arnold Schwarzenegger version. But all of those are kind of a little bit over the top designs, so I'm probably going to go with the Gotham version of the character. Although I do prefer Mr. Freeze being bald. So I'm still kind of hoping in the future, maybe in the Matt Reeves Batman trilogy, we'll get a version of this character that has a better look, more resemblant of maybe like the Arkham games. But overall, that was the best design for the DC characters in my opinion. Again, share your thoughts in the comments section down below. What do you think the best costume design is for these different characters? And let me know if you want me to do a similar video but with Marvel characters. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.